Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm joined by Hanney Seylim. Is that how you pronounce it? Seylim? Salim?
Salim.
Salim, okay.
Salim.
Hanney Seylim. Critical Faculty, go subscribe. Great channel. You have Lawrence Cross on. You have Michael Shermer on there. You got Derek from Myth Vision. You have all these great guests to come on, talk about science, philosophy, religion, just like my channel. Just a different host. Better host, actually. And but yeah, you go subscribe to Critical Faculty, and we're gonna do some call-ins. I haven't really done this yet. Theists and Deists, whatever your worldview is, if you want to challenge the worldview of what you're about to hear, I'm gonna give the link in a second. But first, I'm gonna throw it over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your channel, about your worldview, and how you arrived at your worldview. And take it away.
Right. Look, my name is Hanney. Started life in a multicultural household with a Muslim Egyptian father and a Catholic Irish mom. Traveled the world. My father used to work as a diplomat, so started with traveling the world, living in different cultures, learning different languages, and unfortunately, I did not have any atrocities committed against me to leave religion. It was an intellectual setup, really. It was me looking up the evidence, me looking up the what's available. By the way, my father did not raise me as a certain religion. He was pretty much an atheist himself. My mother was non-practicing Catholic. She was pretty open. She's a bit more spiritual than religious. She's no longer. She's an atheist now. And even my late sister, my only sister that I lost to cancer, I'm afraid, a few years back, she also was more of a deist or agnostic. So my entire household was didn't have that problem. My current wife is atheist like me, so I don't have daily struggles with conflicting worldviews. I didn't leave religion because it was so bad to me, or I was molested in church or something like that. It was really me looking up the evidence, and things did not make sense. When I started Critical Faculty 3 years ago, I have not lived in the Arabic world for quite some time, and my Arabic was quite rusty. And I wanted to start an English channel because that's where I'm really most comfortable. But then I realized that the area that needs the most help was the Middle East. So I've started to brush up my Arabic and came up with the Arabic channel to not to bring discomfort to the faithful, because they are my mates, they are still relatives, but I've got part of my family that's still religious. I've never had problems with people. People are people, they can be victims of bad ideas. It was me challenging the ideas themselves and bring the scrutiny and put them under the limelight. So yeah, and I continue to do so, but I don't attack religion. I don't go out of my way to attack religion per se, but it was mostly explaining about science, logic, reason, philosophy, just broadening the mind of everyone so that hopefully they can come up with the conclusions themselves.
Right. And so you consider yourself just an atheist?
Yes.
Right.
With an open mind.
Sure. Which I think every atheist should have. I think every atheist should be looking for someone to change their mind. It shouldn't just be dogmatic about it. But that's what science is all about. Science is always about never arriving at the answer that we're going to stay with forever. Always have to challenge all this. All this data needs to be challenged and tested and try to figure out if there's another answer to this, whatever the problem is, if that makes sense. Yeah. So how did you actually decide that you don't think that there's a mind behind all this, that you just think that everything is natural? When did you get to that conclusion?
It didn't start that way. It's nobody starts from the big picture. We start at the little details. And the little details started with me. So I was raised in a household where the Quran and the Bible were both available, and I can go to a mosque or a church or a synagogue if I wanted to. Me reading up the message from God led me to believe that there is no way this writing, this babbling could have come from a reasonable God. There's just no way. It's a sort of thing that we deem horrible, immoral in today's world and any other day.
Yeah.
Because they're always trying to convince you. Well, you know what? That was actually all right at the time. You have to read it in the historical context of the event. Even at that time, certain things were deemed to be immoral. So I'll give you an example, just to not be broad. In the Quran or in the Islamic tradition, there's something called the captives of Autas, where the Prophet Muhammad could raid a neighboring village, and they have to be unbelieving village, and they could rip them off of their money. 20% of that will go to God and His prophets. I'm not sure what would God do with the money. The rest is to his followers or those who sort of fight with him, and they can take the women as captives. Now, before Islam, there was an Arabic tradition: is you don't take a married woman as a captive. It's just you don't do that. You don't do that not because of not for the respect for the wrong reason. Still, not for the respect of women, but for the respect of the man who owns a woman. Still
Sure.
back, you know. But nevertheless, the women were benefiting from not being raped if she was married, at least. But then Prophet Muhammad told him it was all right to do so, and his followers who were fighting with him actually felt embarrassment, did not want to do that because it said, well, that's not our tradition. And a Quranic verse and a bit of interpretation came to give license for that to happen. So God here intervenes to reverse an advancement in human thinking to take it back a notch. There's no way that this sort of thing can come from God because we've already advanced beyond that point. We know from the Ten Commandments and thou shalt not kill. I'm sure ancient Egyptian civilization was not based on killing at random. They knew something was wrong about it, so it was not breaking news of any sort. So it made me think, okay, well, that's going to be human endeavor, never God's.
Right. And so once you get to the position where you're now no longer afraid to question the logic of the Bible or the Quran or whatever it is, it's not that long before you start knocking down bricks that make the whole thing fall over. It's like you start right off the bat, Genesis, the first chapter in Genesis, where you get Adam and Eve, and it's like you have this God who's all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful. He is creating these beings. And whether you want to say they have a soul, they have free will, it doesn't matter because it's no different than you and I creating a robot. You are the one who has the source of the creation. You made this thing. So if it's flawed in any way, whose fault is it? Do you blame the robot for the fault in the robot? No, you did something wrong. You got to fix it. So it's like they put Adam and Eve in this garden and say, "Don't eat this one tree that I'm going to put right in the middle." And this is the one I'm just going to put it right in your face, and I'm going to leave, even though I'm all knowing. I'm going to leave, and when I come back, and then I'm not going to be able to know where you are. Hey, Adam, where are you? Wait, don't you know everything? Don't you see everything? There's other parts of the Bible where it says God is all knowing and all seeing. He sees everything under the dark, everything, all within the shadows. He sees it all. It's like, wait a minute. So you start to see things, little details like this, and then after that, it's just a matter of time for the whole thing falls apart. So that's my take on that. And I think you would agree. There is a super chat, and we're gonna answer the super chat. It's a good question. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna give the chat the link to join. Please only join if you're challenging. If you want to just kind of join to chill out, I mean, I don't really say you can't, but try it. I don't want to have like 1,000 people. Well, there's no way I'll have I don't want to have like 5 people just sitting there. You know what I mean? Because you guys get what I'm saying. If you have something that you want to challenge us on, join. but no, it is open. So there's the link, and the question is, why, other than the resurrection, can you explain the martyrdoms of the apostles? Do you want to take this one first?
Well, William Lane Craig brings this up as some sort of evidence, but come on, I mean, would dying for a certain cause make it reliable and make it true? If this is the case, then Islam is also true, because we see martyrdom in Islam. We see people dying for a nationalistic cause, like the kamikaze in Japan when they were, flying their planes and becoming suicidal for a cause. Humanity is able to provide that crazy altruistic moments for a cause, and it does not even have to be religion, and it does not make that cause righteous or true. So no, it doesn't. You still have to probe the evidence of whether the actual claim for it to be true is to be true in the first place. Dying for a cause does not make that cause necessarily intrinsically true.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. My question, my response to that is, how do you know the apostles? They at the last second weren't like, no, 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 I'm okay. Sorry, don't kill me, don't kill me. You don't know that. There's no. You were like, all you have is sources from hundreds of years after the fact, which is Eusebius, and he's gonna write the best narrative that's gonna make Christianity look the best. That's what he's doing. He's an apologist, one of the greatest apologists of all time. I mean, we know in other writings of Eusebius where he made stuff up, so he's already condemned as a liar. So now you have this guy who you know is already lied about stuff, telling you the narratives of all these these martyrdoms. Now it gets even worse. James. We have two different sources for James's death. In one source, he is stoned to death. In another source, he's thrown off a building. Well, which one is it? If you can't even get the stories right. And by the way, the Epistle of James, it's written way past the fall of Jerusalem. He's talking about the dispersion of the 12 tribes. That's past 70 AD. He's supposed to be dead by 62 AD. So you got a lot of problems with these martyrdoms, with these apostles. The narratives don't match up. The sources are terrible. You only have a couple within a couple spans of 100 years. You have like a sentence here, another sentence here. Origen has a couple things to say, and then they don't add up. So my response to this question is, how do you even know that the sources are correct? That's what I would start with. But yeah. So the chat, I gave you guys the link. It is out if you guys want to join and challenge us. And until that time, we can discuss a little bit more about what you got going on your channel. So you had on Lawrence Cross recently.
Well, I've had him. He's about to come again in about 2 or 3 weeks to finish part 2 of the conversation. So he's appeared on my channel about 6 times now. Richard, I've got Sherman, Michael Shermer. I've got Bart Ehrman, Dr. Robert Price, of course, after getting to know him from Derek's channel and your channel. He's such a wonderful man. I love Dr. Price. And I had so many different, Richard Carrier, so many other speakers, English speakers, but I do also host prominent Arabic speakers. I'm actually hooking Derek up with one prominent Arabic speaker who can speak English and German, lives in Germany, and he's very famous in the Arabic world to open up the picture and introduce your audience to different type of people. But yeah, I'm trying to focus on science. I'm trying to show that certain narrations in the holy texts are scientifically and categorically incorrect. They don't match up with current knowledge of science, and therefore, again, another.
Do you have a good example? Can you give us one example of that?
Oh, from one of the very funny verses in the Quran, that the stars were made as shooting stars to punish the devils and demons. Yeah, it's incredible. Even a shooting star isn't a shooting star. It's not actually a falling star. It's just a cosmic debris that it looks as if it's a shooting star, but it's not a star. If the star fell on Earth, it would be the end of Earth, because these are usually stars bigger than our suns by several times. and our sun is 1.3 million times the size of the Earth, and it's a humble star, so it's not a star.
And so there's another verse in the Quran that I thought was kind of, it talks about the moon chasing after the sun and the sun going underneath the earth and like going in like its resting place during the night. Like
Yes,
it doesn't even realize that the other side of the earth is daytime. And it's like it's sort of a flat earth model that it presents.
yes,
Very much so. I mean,
yes,
it is.
yes,
It's not even very
yes.
much so. It literally
Well,
is a flat earth model.
which is in line with Joshua as well. He's into his war. He needs to win, and God holds the sun in place. So it does not understand that the day and light is the rotation of Earth around its axis. Has nothing to do with the movement of the sun. So it's ancient knowledge. That's what we thought at the time. And if God is mimicking the same knowledge of contemporary humans at that time, it tells me that these were not divine revelations from God, but rather it's people writing up, trying to explain and understand the world around them. Fair play. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. But claiming it later on to be from God is what caused the issue.
Yeah. And like it's just so and here's another thing that this really kind of bothers me is the young earth creationism versus the old earth creationism, right? So a lot of people talk about like, they talk about there's rational Christians who agree that the Big Bang happened. They agree that the Earth is old. They agree that evolution is true. But why would you? Hear me out for this. Ready? Young Earth creationism actually makes more sense from a Christian standpoint. It does, because here's the thing: your Bible literally has dates, has ages for all these people. Abraham was X amount of years old when he had Jacob as a child. Jacob was X amount of years old when he had the 12 sons. Noah was X amount of years old when the flood happened. You can plug in these numbers and you can get a date of when the flood was, which is 2800 BC, which is wow, of on a global flood happening that recent, and we have no evidence for it. But then it gets even worse. Adam and Eve is 4004 BC. Now, right away, people will say, "Oh, come on, you're being cheap." They don't. That's metaphor. That's not really. But here's the thing: how do you get from Abraham being historical, Noah being historical, all these characters in the Bible being historical? Where is the line cross when you get from historical to metaphor? Because there is no line. You're just saying you're just taking a big brush over the whole entire Bible, and whatever parts don't make sense, you just kind of say, it's just metaphor. But there is no line that you can cross and say this is where the metaphors are and this is where the history is. So you have to admit that the Bible's lying at some point. At some point, you have to say the Bible's not is not true. At some point, you have to say, did Abraham exist or not? Which we know he didn't. We know for a fact Abraham didn't exist because it literally claims that he was going to war in Syria and having all these giant battles over the land of Judea. We don't have any archaeology of this. We don't have any historical references of this. It didn't happen. It's just a myth. So it's like, and then you get to Christianity. What does this have to do with Christianity? But why? What is he fulfilling? What what is he fulfilling? If he's fulfilling the scriptures and the scriptures are not real, then why? What's the point? Right?
Completely agree. I completely agree. It's just I always sort of looked at that and I the figure of speech folks, and they are in every religion. In Judaism and Islam as well, we have a new movement called Quran only, where everything is figure of speech, and those are the folks who would like to have their cake and they want to eat it too.
Yeah.
It's just like, if God is talking about this person lived for 935 years, very precise and very particular about the age. It's like me calling you and saying, "Hey, are you going to come to my 31st birthday?" And you go, "Shit, time flies. You're 31 already." And I go, "Well, you know what? It's a figure of speech. I'm not 31 and it's not my birthday and I
Right.
don't exist." I mean, like, what the hell? So where are the facts that
Right.
you're revealing then?
And that's another thing. It's like if the whole point of Christianity is that Adam and Eve sinned and you're condemned to hell, so that you have to believe in the Jesus as a sin atonement. If you don't, you're damned. Okay, well, if Adam and Eve aren't literal, then why would this even have to be the case? Like, what are we doing here? We're just playing pretend. That's all it is. And it's like I'm fine with Christians being like, hey, it gives me purpose. I like my church. I enjoy it. Like I'm not trying to end religion at all, and whatsoever. My only cause for what I do is when it comes to like fundamentalism and people this bleeds into politics. This bleeds into the people's abortion laws, and it affects the way people live. Gay rights, all that stuff. This is not something that we should just, oh, come on, it's their religion, they believe in it. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to be the one to Santa Claus isn't real. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we shouldn't affect other people's lives because of something that gives you purpose.
Remember, Neil. At the end of the day, beliefs inform actions, and actions have consequences. So your actions are predicated upon beliefs, and that's what gives rise to your actions.
Exactly. Constellations Pegasus, my friend. Thank you for the $9.99 super chat. How about the flat Earth and dome? Hard to believe that North American Indians believed in that also. Science shows that false. You need more episodes on that. It is an interesting topic. I will say that. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
Well, I want to give a bit of cut some people some slack and humanity some slack. When Aristotle came and said, like, well, things must have a prime mover, it's just because these people didn't have the right tools at the time, and they were just using their senses like vision and the capacity of logic. And accumulated knowledge at that time, trying to infer, well, what is actually what the hell is happening. So to come up with some wrong ideas at that time, the earth looks to you flat. Of course. I mean, you keep walking on it and you don't feel that you're going in circles or bending at any sort. Gravity is magical that way. So it is quite intuitive to think the earth is flat. And I completely understand in the context of human endeavor and the scarcity of tools. But to claim that the God who's supposed to be outside looking at you from the outside, or, well, he's an omnipresent as well, which means he's inside and outside and into everything and out of everything. And that bird view still gets it completely wrong. I think humanity trying to explain the geology and the geography and get it wrong is like a school kid who tries so hard, gets the answer wrong, but gets a pat on the back from the teacher saying, well done, at least you've researched, you came up with the wrong answer, but that's fine. That's what you do. That's what happens in the pursuit of knowledge. Occasionally you get things wrong, but now that you know that this is, try again and you will get it eventually right. And you never close the door. That's what science does. But when the door gets closed because, hey, this is your God speaking, this is your captain speaking, flying that plane, and whatever I say, it's the ultimate truth. And then you stop and you become dogmatic, and then you become the laughing stock of the world, when the world's completely is gone beyond that point, and you still thinking the Earth is flat. It's just beyond me.
Right. And so when you have scripture that talks about four corners of the earth, and hell being underneath, heaven being above, in the sky above the clouds is the heaven, you're sort of forced into making that assertion. I mean, these are being borrowed from ancient myths that go beyond Israel. So they're borrowing from the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and it's just a natural, like, if you don't have the basic tools for science to figure out, the curvature of the earth, or if you don't have the skills to travel and go to different parts of the world, how are you going to you're not, there's no way of knowing if the earth is flat or round. So this is there's nothing wrong with like the ancients not knowing this, but
Mhm.
once you start looking at other, the moon, you start seeing how the moon acts, the sun, it goes into a certain it looks like it's in a certain path, right? and you start plugging in numbers and doing the math, it becomes very, very, very obvious. And the ancients, as far as the ancient Greeks, knew that the earth was round. Even when this was discovered, it was the people that were religious who held on to flat earth ideas because of scripture. That's why scripture, and that's why dogmatism is so it's so like it's toxic for progress, because you now have to make this true. I have to go out of my way to find data that agrees with what I'm saying. And you see this all the time with apologists. They'll find the one person. Oh, look, Gary Habermas. He's a PhD scholar. He says that the resurrection happened. See, it's true. And that's what they do. That's how they do that's their methodology. The methodology is, this is what the Bible says. Now, what data can I go and look for to prove this is true? That's what this is. That's how you get the flat Earth. That's how you get flat Earth making its way into the Middle Ages, even beyond that.
Yeah, and that's always going to be the problem with a priori and a posteriori knowledge. If you have a belief to start with, and then you build your evidence based on that belief, you're going to always be wrong. Even science, religion, even in real life situations, practical knowledge and streetwise knowledge. If you start with that premise that you believe something, and then you're going to go and try to prove it, you'll always end up being wrong. But if you follow the evidence, doesn't matter what you're trying to pursue, from a crime that's been committed all the way to the age of the universe, you're on the right tracks. This is how you do science. You follow the evidence, even if the outcome is something that you don't like very much.
Yeah. I was thinking about Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson were talking about the Bible.
Mm.
And they were talking about, Jordan Peterson was talking about how the Bible might not be like true according to science, but it's true in the sense that it's necessary because the stories give us a ways and means to live by. And he says, and he was basically making the argument that we need these stories to tell us how to live. And Joe Rogan was like, why? But seriously though, what is it about the ancient text that we need? My argument against that would have been, what's wrong with movies and music? The new current, the directors that are around today who make great films that talk about the world today in the current zeitgeist of today's world, and things that are happening with racism and bigotry and LGBT, all that stuff that's happening in the world right now. That is the modern scripture, is film and movies and music. Why is it that the older it is, somehow it becomes like more, it becomes like more valuable and more sacred, I guess you would say? That doesn't make sense.
Well, Peterson is quite interesting. I don't think he's religious, right? He uses Nietzsche quite a lot, and Dostoevsky, Jung's archetype, and storytelling, and they call it metaphorical truth. And metaphorical truth is, even though it's not really true, but because it's consequential, the way it leads people, it unites people together, and the way it gave us an advantage while evolving, gathering under one idea together and surviving horrible conditions. It's enough to make it solid truth because it helps us survive. And Habermas talks about the same sort of concept and how wonderful religion can be. I do agree to a certain extent, and he's also using something to do with the elite intellectuals, which is basically goes like that. You and I might be very smart, and if we're smart and we can give up the idea of God and still lead a reasonable life, so be it. But don't forget, the masses don't have that capacity. They are sheep, and they need to be led. They need to unite around an idea. Otherwise, they become animals again. And the killing and the fornicating on the streets will start happening all over again, which is, I don't think it's ever happened. It's just a lack of faith in humanity and what it can do. Always crimes are going to be committed. Issues are going to happen all every now and then. But how are we going to improve ourselves as a race, as a human species, if we think the 5% only know the truth and the 95% need to be told lies just to conform to certain regulations and be easily led? As you said before, I go and watch Superman. I'm a big fan, like Dr. Robert Price, of our cult heroes and our super humans and superheroes. But I know that Batman does not exist. I know that Superman
Right.
doesn't exist,
Good
and
point.
I still enjoy the movie. And I
Yeah.
can actually, within that 2 hours, I can be so involved in the story that I can cry somebody who's dead, or and we have that capacity. But at the end of the 2 hours, I go out thinking that, okay, well, Superman does not exist. I know that, but I still enjoy the story. What's wrong with that?
No, I agree, and that's why I like the concept of the logos, because the logos is like the character that you insert in a drama or a film or whatever, and you make this character into the role model of what is right and what is true. He becomes the sword for justice and peace and truth. And like at the time, Jesus was that. Okay, in the time period in the first century, I'm sure that the gospels were necessary for the times that people were in that time. But we have a new world now. We have a new what's true today was not true 2,000 years ago. So that's why I think that like Superman and Batman, like you mentioned, it sounds funny and like people laugh at that, but like no, this is how we shape the this is how we shape the minds of the young and how we go about telling stories and setting what is true and what is not true. And that's why I think that that's why I think film and art and poetry it's all so important, and then it needs to continue that way.
Look. We have the capacity. We want to let our brains wander, and we want to speculate things that are not necessarily true. And we have the space for that. It's called arts. Science probes what's objectively true. That's what we're trying to find out. What is objectively true? uh, uh, the field of possibilities and the fields of the unknown, or the impossible, it's got a place. It's called arts. You can create science fiction. You can create things that don't exist. Where the world of dragons, and the lady of the dragons in Game of Thrones, that woman with the three little baby dragons on her
Right.
shoulders, and we can create that fantasy world, and we can live in it,
Yeah.
knowing that it's not true, but still enjoy it. And
And we could still get truth from it. We can
yes,
we can relate it to the times that we're in this real world. That's what I
abs-
like, and this relates to the question that we just got in the super chat from thank you, Mummy Vale, 4.99. I appreciate that. He says, "Do you think the Bible has any value going forward?" I say yes, and I say not to be dogmatic and follow it and say that it's sacred and it's God's word, but to learn the history, to learn that okay, this is where we were at, but this is where we're at now, and you could still pick apart the parts that we do agree with. There are some parables in there in the New Testament that are great. That we should forgive sinners. We should do all that stuff. But I also think we should be very critical of which time period it's written in, who was it written for, what was the circumstances of the time period, and it's also just obviously a great way to look at history. What do you think about that?
look, I get very, very disturbed by people going on air and sort of burning the Quran or burning the Bible. That's not what you do. This is
Right.
the memoir of humanity. This is our what we wrote about our. If we think that this is man-made, this is the glimpse of how we used to think. It's like going to Lucy, the remain of Atheropiscus afarensis shows the evolution of humanity, and going to say, well, that's quite inferior. Humanity's evolved beyond that. I'm going to destroy this. That is ridiculously crazy. This is how we used to think in the past. This is brilliant. We need to keep it. We need to understand it. We need to understand our past so
Yeah.
we can understand our future. So it's There's no way we should do that.
And I will still be I'll be the first person, even though how critical I am of the Bible and how I think it's illogical and how it doesn't make sense and there's a lot of contradictions. I agree with all of that, but I still think it's a masterpiece for a lot of other reasons besides logic, besides truth. It's a masterpiece because it is so it is such a high level of interconnectedness between a span of centuries. You got this prophet living in 500 BC, another one living in 300 BC. You got the Genesis happening, and all this time period is put into one book, and you see how interconnected their thinking is. That to me, it makes it a masterpiece. Not that it's true, not that it's not contradicted, not that there's a bunch of stuff wrong in there, but just for that reason alone. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much. This is so nice of you. $49.99. Wow, you probably have the record on this channel for a super chat, and I really want to. I don't even know how to express how happy I am, how thankful I am for this. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And let's read this super chat. People who know me know I'm an atheist. I ask some, would you believe in a God if he let his people believe the earth was flat, covered by a rock, clear crystal, or presses out metallic dome for thousands of years? I see panic in their eyes.
Yeah, but basically, what he's trying to say is if God is watching us stumbling and getting his message incorrectly, like for example in Islam, it is said that the Old Testament and the New Testaments were corrupted, and the new big books are the real books are hidden somewhere. Muslims still believe that there's a revelation. There's a Bible, there's a gospel, and they were actually sort of descended from heaven with Gabriel to both Jesus and Moses, just intact like the Quran. But the true books were corrupted. So my question is, God keeps getting his message corrupted, and he keeps repeating the same situation without any measure of. But they say, well, no, he's done the right thing in Quran. He wrote in the Quran that he's going to vow to keep his words intact and never to be changed. Even though we have evidence that the Quran has changed over time, even though we have different copies of the Quran where different verses are even omitted or added, or different words are in different areas. And it's happening as we speak, because it doesn't need to be literal change of the word. But if you have 5 people disagreeing on a meaning of a word, like the beating of the wives, and on Derek's show, there was a guy who was saying, no, the beat here is an old Arabic word for hug them or divorce them or whatever. Then God still failed the same, because his word is ambiguous, and that's what the problem of communicating God's divine final message, or any message of that sort, with language. If God was real, it would be a direct download into your brain. He does not need language.
And you're so right. And Constellation Pegasus, what you said is really profound, because if you have a deity that's all-knowing and wants, and his only objective, this is all he says, he wants worship. I mean, that's clear. We can all agree on that. Jews, Muslims, and Christians all agree that God wants worship more than anything else. If that's your only objective, and you're failing to get most people to actually see that, then this, and what Constellation Pegasus alluded to, is like, all you have is a text that gets the world wrong. It alludes to flat Earth. It alludes to not understanding science, not understanding the universe, not understanding that above the clouds is space and not heavens, not some 7 heaven realm that they're talking about. And you're alluding to all this stuff that's not true, and you expect that this to be the all-knowing creator. It is so true what he's saying. It really is. But thank you for that super chat. I really appreciate that. So I saw another one pop up. Oh, here it is. I don't know. I cannot read that. Can you read that?
Yeah, mashallah, it's God's will. It's an Arabic expression that means whatever God wants and wills, it's going to happen.
Oh,
Um,
so he's pretty much alluding to what we're talking about.
yeah. It's tongue in cheek, I think.
Oh, okay, that's funny.
And
What are
the
your
one above it, Subhanallah, is kind of the same.
so some of these people are probably from your channel, I'm guessing.
Yes. These are people who follow my channel.
And if you can you read that, or do you not?
Yeah. He's welcoming who's Al Yom, which is the guy above him, just saying hello to him.
Oh, cool. That's good. Welcome everybody. Everybody from Critical Faculty, welcome on the channel. And Moonshoe says, "May the force be with you." Do you know there's actually a movement of a religion of the force?
Oh, really? Okay. So
Yeah.
that's mixing Star Wars and religion in a lovely
It's like
mix.
Richard Carrier was talking about. It's like Taoism, because in Taoism there is no. It's not like a theistic God, but
Yeah.
it's not atheist either. It's sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
But it's like the force. It's like the Tao. To
Yeah.
follow the Tao is to be like water. To
They
go.
call it non-theist religions. Yeah. Well, Bruce Lee, the water situation. That's a very famous Bruce Lee little speech. Is be like the water. That changes and contains everything and changes its body to suit whatever vessel it's within. That's what Bruce Lee wanted to say.
Yeah, Bruce Lee was a great actor, great mind. I have his book called the Jeet Kune Do, the Tao.
Mhm.
Wait, what is it called? The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, and it's his. It's basically about like his philosophy on fighting, but he also layers it to be a philosophy of life as well. And he basically his philosophy was to have no philosophy. It's very postmodernist. It's very Socratic, and he's very. It's like Eastern Socrates. Like that's what it is. It's like question everything. Don't have a don't have a specific dogma on one thing. Like don't be just a kicker, but be a kicker, a puncher, a jabber, and be all that. Like be everything. Be all. Like do like it's sort of like it's a philosophy of everything. It's like there is no worldview. It's all worldviews. It's all true. It's whatever. That I don't. It's really hard to explain, but it's like
But,
basically. Go
yeah,
ahead.
but it's water, so be ready to change according to
Yes.
new information. So water changes its shape, and by the way, Bruce Lee was an atheist, so
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
actually was an atheist, and what he was trying to do, Bruce Lee was a clever man. He's coming from the East, and the Americans are lapping up his work, in terms of movies, and he said, well, I'm going to sell my piece, then I'm gonna be the man from the Orient who's going to reveal some knowledge to them, and he was I think he was cashing on certain areas, which is fair play. But what I have a problem with wisdom. It's been said wisdom is one thing that you can use depending on what you want to achieve. I look at wisdom with quite suspicion, because I can give you wisdom that proves something or advocates something, and it's opposite at the same time.
Right.
So I can tell you the early bird gets the worm, or I can say patience is virtue. I can play around with one thing and its opposite, and put it in a context that is so wise that you can believe one thing and its contrast at the same time. So
And what's true for one concept is not true for another concept.
yes, yeah.
Well,
So it's gonna be the context. It's gonna always be the context of what you're saying. Is virtue always? Is patience always a virtue? It can be, because sometimes you got to act fast, otherwise you die. So it might not be wise to be patient sometimes.
yeah, and Bruce Lee was he really. It's like it's almost as if he thought that being like water, because water can crash, water can flow, water can mold, water when you fill the water becomes the cup. This is what I was trying. I forgot what I was going to say. That's my the water becomes the cup, right? Become the situation that you're in. So when if you want to really be like what he's talking about, you have to sort of understand each moment, each person you're talking to, every situation you're in, and become that entity. That's what he's talking about. That's his philosophy, which is very valuable, I think. I think that makes a lot of sense. You should try to understand everything and everyone and try to become whatever situation you're putting yourself into.
And that's a good advice. I can understand it, and I think it's a sound advice.
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of being dogmatic. So remember,
Exactly.
dogmatic is the water in its frozen form,
Yeah.
and you want to be that liquid or the vapor that sort of flows and changes, and that's what you want to be as a human.
Yeah. Actually, I just thought about this. Derek, when he first started his channel, he was called the Water Boys before he turned into Vision.
Oh, really?
I think that's the reason why is because of the Bruce Lee "Be Like Water"
All
thing.
right.
Yeah.
Because that was a Adam Sandler movie. Was it that Bobby Boucher, the
Water
Water
Boys.
Boy? Better than the Island Boy.
But the reason why I brought that up is because I'm not surprised that him and I would fall down the same path from hardcore theism to like a sort of Taoist, like deist. It's funny how those words almost sound similar, Taoism,
Mm,
deism, but like they're like you sort of have to have that bridge. So it's not that easy to go from
mm.
thinking that the Bible is 100% pure and perfect and true to being like, no, it's 100% wrong and atheism and there is no mind behind the universe. There usually is a middle stage before you get to that point. And like, yeah, Taoism offers that to a lot of people. Richard Carrier was a Taoist when he was in his
Yeah,
teenage years
yeah.
before he went and got educated and became Richard Carrier that we know today. But it's interesting to see that. It's interesting to see that people actually fall down that path.
Neil, we evolved to believe. We evolved as species to believe. Our brain is made of three parts. 525 million years in the evolution, our brains are, and you've got three parts of the brain. So the back bit called the ancient brain or the reptilian brain, and that's the to up to 300 million years we've lived with that sort of little brain with the nervous system that controls urges like sex, foods, all the biological things for you to survive. And then the middle brain, or you call it the neo brain, it's part in the middle where you get all the ties and the warm-blooded animals and the camaraderie and the groups of animals. And then you only the prefrontal lobe cortex, the front bit, it's only about 2 or 3 million years old. And this is
Wow.
where all you have your logic. So we have evolved to believe. We are still very emotional and we're still apish, as Richard Christopher Hitchens once put it. We're still carry the lowly stamp of our lowly origins, with a very big adrenaline gland and very small prefrontal lobe cortex that hasn't evolved enough yet. Hence the war, and hence people are still waging wars in the 21st century. It's still happening. We're still apes.
Wow. And that's what's his name talks about that. Michael Shermer talks about how we evolved to sort of believe in the supernatural a little bit because there's certain situations that it actually helps survival. Like it's good to think that there's something there or there's like something behind the whatever in the woods and you hear the fussle in the woods and like you have to if you're not scared of it or if you don't have that fear there's something about fear that helps survival.
Yes.
And that's funny how they use that term fear of God. It's like that's sort of like it's sort of like a common denominator within all these religions. It's like that fear aspect. It's like something driving motivator or something like that.
It's one of the primal instincts, and very, very strong in humans. Babies apparently, and it can be inherited genetically, like the fear of snakes. Babies are afraid of snakes, uh,
Wow.
and they don't know what that is.
And that's
But
like
it's
spiders, snakes, things that
yeah,
have poison. It's funny how we are just like all so scared of that stuff. By the
yeah.
way, Matt says, I evolved to believe that I should donate this. Thank you for that $5 super chat, Matt. I appreciate you. Feel free to ask questions. If you want to add to the conversation or whatever, feel free. And by the way, the chat or the link is in the posted on the top. If anyone wants to join and challenge, if they have a idea, maybe it's deism. Maybe you don't think the Bible's true, but you think there's some sort of mind behind this all. I want to hear why you think that. So if you feel free to join in. But yeah. But yeah, that back to the snake thing. The serpent, the spider, scorpions, they just they creep us out. It's like this natural, like everyone has it. Everyone. I
Ro-
can't think
ro-
of one person who likes spiders.
Rotten foods. We evolved to evolve a feeling of disgust when we see rotten food, and we know that because eating it could end your life. Um, um, while you're sort of scavenging for food, and we develop that disgust, and it's a very strong impulse. So you can evolve, you can carry genetically a lot of negative feelings towards certain things to keep you alive, and therefore we're believers of this. Imagine then inherently, and I think they found the gene. There are certain genes set up that will make, if it's available in people, especially with people with sort of creative thinking, the left hemisphere of the brain dominant, they are more. They have the disposition to believe in a god or a deity more often than others. So we have evolved to believe because it kept us alive.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And so what fascinates me the most about the brain is how it's not just one big like source of all of our motor skills and functions and memory. There's different parts of the brain that do different things. That is crazy to me because think about it. Like this is like a network of of different, like they're all alive in their own way, in their own weird way. Like you have the right brain. Wait, let me ask you this. I've heard the right brain, left brain thing is true, but I've also heard that someone said it got debunked in modern days or something. Is that true?
No, no, it's still true. The logical areas, there are chambers, and we can actually do the scans and see people who are artistic and pattern recognition and mathematical solving mathematical issues. You can actually see it, and it's mapped, but it's not as defined as it used to be. Used to be, well, like it's the brain elasticity does not give the brain that sort of situation where a certain area is responsible of that particular area. It's very complex, and it works together. And then you come up with that emergent property within the brain. So you can't really, like consciousness. Whereabout in the brain is consciousness? We don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, we don't know. It's everywhere. It's the entire brain functioning at the same time, yield that emergent property. So sometimes you end up with emergent properties that is the result of a very complex and very and you can't identify or isolate. There's so many different processes. So the distinct right and left hemisphere of the brain is no longer as defined as it used to be, because there are few things contributing. Even some mathematical solving, you can still borrow from the right hand side of the brain, or sorry, the left hand side of the brain, because you need sometimes creativity. So somebody like Einstein, you think he'd be very logically dominant, but no. Most of Einstein's theory have come when he was on a thought experiment, like gravity. That guy in the elevator, free falling from an elevator. There was a guy washing his window when he was sitting in his patent office in Switzerland, thinking. So if you're just mathematical, you will not let your brain wander and think about somebody's washing your window. You got to have a little bit of artistic thinking as well. So those who've got that nice balance are usually a pretty interesting thinkers.
You know, it's interesting that you point that out because the reason why I asked about the two brains, right brain, left brain, is because doesn't this sort of debunk the whole idea of a soul? Now, think about this. We now know from science and from anatomy, we can now pinpoint parts of the brain that has specific functions. And people even we can even get into personality traits, certain parts of the brain that are more capable of other parts of the brain can lead to certain types of personality disorders or, benefits in some cases. But people used to think that the soul was in the heart. And like this gets into the God of the gaps argument because it's like we continue to figure out more stuff about the human condition, and it gets more and more naturalist, more and more like common sense when it comes to like why we do certain things. and we were pushing the idea of like this soul and like this sort of Platonic idea that our soul is trapped within the body, and then at the moment of death, it gets released and goes somewhere else. But like we know that the brain is why we have memory. The brain is why we have certain functions and certain things, certain ideas, artistic value, or I mean skills and all that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I completely agree, because if the brain who you inherit, and you have no control over, and it can be damaged at birth, being with chemical imbalance of some sort, or a damage in the prefrontal lobe cortex that will lead you to commit certain atrocities. Uh, what does your soul here have to do with anything? If your brain that you're born with is damaged to start with, what about people who are quite normal? And I'll give you two incidents that happened in science. It was a guy who suddenly developed pedophilic tendencies out of the blue. And they scanned the brain and they found a tumor on the amygdala, which is an area that functions the moral judgment and reasoning in the brain. They removed the tumor. Pedophilia is gone.
Wow.
Tumor came back. Pedophilia was back.
Are you kidding me? Wow.
Yes, and I can and send you the links later on. Another situation, something called the split brain. It's actually on Wikipedia. We can share it at some point. Split brain syndrome, where patients of epilepsy, to relieve the electrical charges coming from the right to the left hemisphere, they sever the brains. They sever the connections, the tissues between the right and the left hemisphere.
Wow.
And one guy, they've done that. That guy ended up with half of his brain atheist and the other half was theist.
Get the frig out of here. That is
Yes.
How does how do they know that though?
They weren't talking. Once you sever, the way the two sides of the brains communicate is through some tissues and some connections between the two sides of the brains. If you sever them, it's almost like you have two voices in your head.
Wow, that is crazy. I want to touch on that in a second, but we got a super chat that just popped in. He said, "It's Matt again. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you so much. You are the best. If you know anything about the psychology of religious experiences, where we talk with God / ancestors, etc., that would be great to hear about. Learning about that really helped my deconversion." It's good. That's a really good question. Psychology of religious experiences, and this is big because when I used to think that I was feeling the Holy Spirit in church, and I hear from Muslims who say, "Oh, when I go to my imam and I celebrate certain when I do fasting or whatever, I get the Holy Spirit of Allah." And I hear from Buddhists that say when they fast and they do their meditations, they can trip and have hallucinogenic experiences. Well, it's easier for a fundamentalist to say that's Satan tricking them. But if you really want to be honest about religion and where if this is all true or not, you're going to ask, why is it working for everybody when they all can't be true at the same time? And that's when I realized there's a psychology behind this. There's some chemicals in my brain that are contributing to me feeling this way about the religious experience. What do you think about that?
Look, again, this is an area where helpless evolved. Remember, we lived with the ancient and the middle brain for over 525 million years. The brain is about 4 billion years in the making, ever since the first cell was first introduced in the biogenesis, where inanimates turn into animates at some point through complex chemical and biochemical interactions. And to have only emotions and impulses governing all species, and that's enough for you to survive. We did not evolve to understand the worlds of the very small, like the quantum mechanics, or the worlds of the very large, like planets and galaxies. We evolved to survive, and only you need for that is emotions and ties with groups and families, and looking after your children, and children looking after you when you're old. So that was plenty. That's enough. And that's why religious communities flourish, They mate like rabbits. I'm an antinatalist, so I don't have children, and I will not have children. I'm not going to bring consciousness to this life to suffer. But I respect everybody's freedom to do so. It's not my recommendation. That's what I'm going to do for myself. I'm a vegetarian as well because I don't want to inflict suffering, because my taste buds demand me to have certain taste, and that's a decision I've made as well. But you don't need all of that. These are articulations that happened in the last 2 million years. So the urge to hold hands, and by the way, it does not have to be religious. That experience can be repeated in a Queen's concert, or Metallica, if you love that sort of music.
Yeah,
If you're Liverpool at Anfield and singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," the Liverpool anthem, and you feel 100,000 people next to you singing, and you're goosebumps, or you're in an opera crying, you don't need this is a human condition. We have emotions are very, very important.
yeah,
So
and that
I completely understand that.
yeah, and I was gonna say like I talked about earlier when it comes to this like logos thing, right? Where we can inject truth into music and movies, and that gives us purpose. We can still get those same experiences. Maybe not that they're not religious, but the same. We could still affect those emotions and feelings and bring out purpose by just those type of methods in arts. So that's why I think that we should. That's why I think that's one thing about religion that I think we should try to extract from and apply into new areas, because I think that there's something valuable in that, and the community aspect of that.
Yes, yes. We're not. They always say putting atheists together. If you put 7 atheists in a room, you'll end up with eight opinions. We're like herding cats. We're so individuals. It's very difficult to unite us. Maybe it's a feature and a bug at the same time. One thing is we remember the world. At some point, it was nothing to do with individualism. There was no such thing as individuals. It was a group. And it was for a very good reason. We're entering postmodernism, and we're entering the uniqueness of individuals. And United States is predicated on expressing yourself as an individual and your individual rights, and that's why it's flourishing. But there's a balance. If you can strike the great balance of keeping the group together and survive, and given the rights to individuals to express themselves, then you strike gold.
That's absolutely true. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much. Seriously, you are the best. I love you. And does anyone read the Contemporary English Version Bible? It's my go-to Bible now because it's easy to read, like a modern book. Genesis 1, verse 6 through 7 say dome twice. That's really interesting to me. I've I think I've flipped through this version before, just to compare it to King James and other versions. I'm not. I don't think I even own a copy of it though. And I usually go to the NASB, the New American Standard Version. Bible. That's the one I like. They're probably very similar because they're updated and good, clear English. They use the right manuscripts, like the Textus Receptus, and it's very accurate to what it should be. There's not a lot of adding or doing anything. It's not like the King James where they just kind of. But the King James has like that archaic Shakespearean "thou maketh doeth," like that sort of poetic type of English. But yeah, that's interesting. I'll check that out. The dome thing though, it's the same dome twice, so it's like right in your face. Like this is basically laying out that we think the Earth is flat.
Yeah. Well, Constellation Pegasus makes a very good point here as well. Uh, Remember the amount of translation the Bible had to go through, and the meaning that you lose. You lose meaning in the same language without without having any translation, just by the virtue of advancement in time. The word "gay" 80 years ago, it meant completely something different. When you say, "Hey, good day, you have yourself a gay day," it means a happy day. The word gay has changed over time, and only in the 60s or the 50s it's taken a new form, and it's now recognized as a different meaning. So even without translation, words morph and change and have more popular usage in certain areas. So imagine adding to that translation from a type of Hebrew that's no longer spoken. It's not the Hebrew spoken in Israel right now. It's not the same Hebrew. And then you add to that and then change it to Latin and confide it only to the priests, and people were not allowed to understand or read. If you want to understand the Bible, you go to the church and it will be read to you in Latin and then will be explained to you. We're not allowed. And that's what sort of one of the reasons the 30 Years' War between Protestant and Catholics have started, where it was said, well, we need to translate these. People need to read them for themselves. So you end up with another translation of a translation of a translation, and you end up then with the word alma to mean virgin, even though it means the young lady, which because the word in Hebrew is batula. And it's not a virgin, it's just a young lady, and a young lady does not have to be necessarily virgin. So
when you discover
changing words.
Yeah. By the way, did you just hear that sound that I just made or no?
Yes, I heard. Yeah.
Oh, you did hear that? Because I was wondering if it was going to play through or not. But I wanted to play a clip because, and this has to do with what we're talking about. Is I posted this video on Facebook. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let me see here. Let me see. Share my screen. Window. Here we go. Oh, that's not it. Chrome tab. This is it. Okay, cool. All right, so you can see this, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna play this real quick.
This guy.
You aren't running this universe. You're not even running your own breathing. And you say, who's in charge around here? Well, nobody's in charge. There never was anybody in charge. There's just this happening.
All right, so now I know Alan Watts is kind of out there. He's kind of, he's outdated, but let's say that. But he's very interesting. He was a very interesting mind. He's really fun to listen to. He sort of gives you that 60s psychedelic mentality of philosophy. But that clip right there I like because he's talking about there is no one's in charge. It's just reality. This is it. Now I posted that to Facebook, and a theist commented, someone I know who's a Christian, and said, they must have not heard of DNA yet. I go, what are you talking about? I go, what do you mean? And then so she goes, because DNA shows that there's a code, and therefore a code has to have a creator. I just was like, oh my God. This goes back to the whole, how we know certain parts of the brain do certain things based on hereditary traits. And we know how natural selection works and everything all lines up scientifically. We know these things. And the argument is that because DNA has a code, which is not really a code, we just call it a code because that's how English works. That's how language works. We describe things in certain ways. It's not really a code with numbers in there. It's just a strand of a protein. Now, she was like, because there's a code, it means there's a creator. And then I said to her, well, then you would have to also say that people who have DNA that let them have hereditary traits that say they're more likely to get cancer or that they're going to die in 2 years because some hereditary malfunction, then you have to say that's God's plan. And she goes, no, it's Adam and Eve's fault. And I'm just like,
well, in a few weeks, I'm going to have a conversation with Aaron Ra and Dave Farina on biology. Even the DNA, the double helix, is had its own evolution. There is in biogenesis something called the RNA hypothesis or the RNA world, where it's just the difference between RNA and DNA is RNA is just one helix as opposed to double helix, and it also functions. It does not need protein because protein is a functioning. It governs the functions of the strand, but RNA can actually do that itself without having to code for protein. So no, there isn't a code. It had a humble beginning. It started a very very simple combination of chemicals, but it evolved over time. DNA is it's the recent addition of the complexity that took 4 billion years to reach that sort of way, and more, because there's a theory called panspermia. The word pan means outside, and spermia sperm, where the cells or the building blocks of life have come out of Earth, and which is possible. Nothing supernatural here. In meteors, they land on us all the time. We found that in Australia in 1972, a meteor fell and it had the building blocks of life.
And what's so profound about DNA, what I don't understand about creationists, when they talk about DNA, they're literally admitting that natural selection is true. But that's what DNA is basically doing. DNA is basically showing the evidence of natural selection, if I'm not mistaken. So for a lot of Aaron Ra, I'm glad you're having him on, because he does some great work on debunking these videos that are out there. That Jane and Jane and Sarah, or who is those two? Jane and something, or you know what I'm talking about? The videos that he does.
Yeah.
And they're in one video, they're talking about natural selection and being like, okay, macro. They're talking about they're basically saying micro evolution is true. There's adaptions. They're saying that. And then another video, they're like, no, it can't be true. DNA is a code from God. And like Aaron Ra points out the complete 180 turn they have when they're talking about a different subject. Their ideas have to change, because no matter what, it has to prove God's true. So that's how it's literally the opposite of science. The methodology is we'll change our mind whenever it's necessary, and we'll use data that we like. We'll talk about DNA when it's necessary, but then when it's not necessary, when we're talking about natural selection, let's not get into that. Let's talk about God's plan. It's God creating everything. So that's why I love Aaron Rod. He does amazing. I got to get him back on, by the way.
He's funny. He's got a certain way. He's pretty as well straightforward. He doesn't like to fluff or beat around the bush. He's quite an interesting character for sure. But it's the intelligent design, the ID movement, led by Michael Behe and those creationists, because it's a creationist movement disguised in science, and they lost 5 lawsuits in the U.S. trying to teach intelligent design instead of evolution, or at least have it as a or another theory that can be taught at school. And they lost the Dover case just in the last 20 years. It was the 5th and the last one they lost, where a religious Christian judge said verbatim that the intelligent design movement is a claim for God trying to disguise itself as science, and therefore it's rejected, and it was rejected from being taught in schools. The guys from the Discovery Institute, C. Meyer, Michael Behe, Leonsky, I think, these are all deists or Christians, evangelists, and they're trying to pass on smuggle God within a scientific frame. But if you right now go to Google and Google intelligent design, and you end up with the Wikipedia page, the very first sentence that is written, ID or intelligent design is a pseudoscientific theory for the existence of God.
Wow.
In the definition. And you can see it for yourself right now in Wikipedia. So it's recognized now worldwide. So, but then they've had a Netflix episode where they're saying 1,000 scientists sort of signed a petition to say evolution is hoax, and you are I think it's called outcast, and you are fired from universities if you talk about a competing theory. And there's a dogma in the scientific world where evolution had to be true, which is obviously this is not how science works.
And what's so crazy about that is, so you get like Answers in Genesis, for example, and what they do is they're so sneaky about how how they like go about their explanations for things. They use deist arguments. So they use arguments that are not falsifiable. And they use like, the God of the gaps, or, God is beyond space and time. All those arguments that you don't find in the Bible. Bible says the opposite. Moses was face to face with God. God put his hand over Moses. Stuff like that, right? God literally dwelled in the tent in that camp, whatever, above the Ark of the Covenant, and he's like a cloud of smoke. All that stuff that they ignore when it comes to answers in Genesis, and they use these arguments, right, for these arguments for theism, and they always, it's like they apply it to young Earth, to like certain things, and they make giant leaps in logic to get from A to B, and they just like, and the crazy part about it is like the language they use is so sneaky, because they can get away with saying things that could be true and then apply to something that's completely false.
Yeah. They make intentional categorical fallacies, where they are a fallacy of composition, where they apply certain things and it will seem to be true. Like if you don't understand evolution, or if you've never sort of looked into the science behind it, and you get to hear there's a signature in the cell, and they throw certain terms like that at you. There's a signature. Science have found a code, and that code can never, or terms like irreducible complexity, a complexity in a cell that doesn't have time to evolve. It was found exactly like that. And you, as an untrained person, or a person who does not have enough knowledge in evolution, you'll go, bloody hell, if the cell started with already a complex setup, there must be some designer of some sort then.
Right. And yeah, and it's like, when it comes to like for example, the court case, that to me is a big deal. That should be talked about more, because we now have laid it out in the law, in case law, that creationism is not backed by science and should not be taught in schools. This is not light. This is a huge deal. And that should be used, like people should express that more. It's like what you're doing, teaching this stuff, yeah, in your own houses, in your own church is fine, but this is not science. You do not have a competing theory on the universe or on the world. What you're teaching is a myth, and go ahead.
And the judge was evangelist. The judge was Christian.
Yeah, that's
I mean, that's and people like Francis Collins. Francis Collins is the director of the Genome Project. The guy who, when he was walking, this is the leading scientist in decoding the double helix and the human DNA in the Genome Project. This guy, when he was walking around, I think he was hiking, found a frozen waterfall in 3 places. So he went on his knees and accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. This is the same guy. This is the partition in the human mind. He's one of the people who still maintains that evolution is it's a scientific fact. It's true. So you can have your faith if you want to, but please do not tamper with science. Science is not motivated by any agendas. It's trying to the best its ability to explain and describe the natural, objective reality we live in.
Oh, somebody just joined. It's a Platonist. So I think we have a challenger in the floor is yours.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I am a Platonist. I'm actually, I just deconverted from Catholicism, but I'm in this sort of Platonic monotheism where monism and monotheism are indistinct from each other, because divine simplicity can't be a multiplicity of things. It has to be one thing. So I don't see how that can be any different from monotheism. So to me, monism and monotheism are no different. And Socrates was executed for being a monist, for not applying to the state gods. So I think there's more historical precedence. And if you look at Autonism and the pre-Abrahamic monotheists, I think there's a lot of historical precedent to say that we're already in the direction of logically going in the direction of monotheism in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I talk to a lot of people who are like well educated in this subject when it comes to philosophy and science, they will like to point out that, there's the Epicureans and the atomists who thought that everything was void in atoms, and then there's the Platonists who, like what you just said, forms, metaphysics. There's probably another realm of heaven and hell and all that stuff.
Correct.
And a lot of them point out that Platonism has been debunked. Now, I don't know why. I'm not an expert. I can't say that.
I don't know why that would be the case either. Yeah, I don't know why.
Do you have like a response to people who say that the Epicureans were correct, that this universe is atoms and void, and there's no evidence of a metaphysical realm? Do you have a response to that?
Well, in the Sophists and Theaetetus, Plato talks about people called the atomists, and the atomists are basically the ancient Greek version of scientismists, right? People who thought that everything could be deduced through atoms and science and like physical things. I think one of the problems here is when you get to the argument of divine simplicity, there has to be a thing from which math and science comes from that transcends their own nature, right? So if like one of the big questions that science can't answer is, what was time like before the Big Bang? Well, we don't know. Time is something that you measure mathematically. And so when questions start to transcend the realm of science, you need metaphysics to fill in the blanks. And logic is something that can transcend science as well. So you can use logic and reason, but you can't use science, right? Which means that science must not be a synonym for logic and reason. It must work with those things, right? Which means you can use logic and reason in metaphysics and in the theories of the soul and stuff like that. So you need that third realm, that third sort of thing that explains like why we can agree on things like divine simplicity and the existence of soul. And like also, what is soul? The soul is not like a blue thing in your chest that pops out of you whenever you die. It's like not a thing you can touch or see. It's not a ghost, right? It's something like it's your essence of being that's tied to God, right? So yeah.
So you believe you would argue the ontological argument that we're contingent on a first maker, a first mover, and that's what our consciousness is basically like a reflection of some other mind.
Yeah,
I understand where you're at.
I always tell people that the one, which is what Platonists call God, like the one sees and hears what you do. So soul is not something that you have; it's something that you participate in. This is something that Plotinus talks about, right? We participate in soul collectively because soul exists as the other to the one. The one has so much love and like existing power that it wants to create another, but it also can't because it's the one. Right. So it sort of emanates the other. And that's where our souls come from. Right. And so like we have to exist, but also like our existence is contingent on the thing that we came from. It's a really existential sort of a conversation. But yeah, we participate in soul. We don't have like an individually created soul. I know that the Thomists think that this body soul union is a thing that exists where your soul is created at the same time as your body. That is, of course, nonsense. And the only reason that they believe that is because they believe in original sin and the idea that there were primordial human beings, blah, blah, blah. I mean, a primordial couple of beings that were all descended from, blah, blah, blah. So they have to defend that. But if they didn't have to defend that, then they probably wouldn't, honestly.
It's very interesting. Would you agree that you're a deist? Not exactly. You don't have like a god named Zeus or anything like that? Or do you have a specific name for God?
I think the name The One is actually a very intimate name. It's sort of like it has this almighty aspect to it, but it's also very intimate. Like you are the one I need, right? It's like this. It's this sort of like personal thing. And no, I wouldn't say I'm a deist because deism implies that there's no It's weird because he transcends desire and will, but the one also doesn't lack those things because the one doesn't lack anything. So I think deism sort of has this hands-offish God that sort of just makes a universe just because, and we don't know why. Whereas like the one creates things because it emanates pure love and being, and it needs the other to create and to appreciate. Like that's the only way it can actualize its own Thomas Aquinas was correct about actualizing your own existence. Like every form wants to actualize its own being. So the one actualizes its being by creating the other, right? Like trees grow, air is like breathable, and like so the one creates because that's just what it does. It has to actualize.
Do you mind me intervening here? Platonist, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, Hanney?
Very good, very good. I'm just going to challenge one aspect here. You said the one doesn't lack a thing; he's complete, and yet you just said just literally right now the one cannot actualize himself or itself unless you create other forms to recognize his existence or creation. How can one be complete and needs acknowledgement from other consciousness to realize that his form actually exists in the first place?
Sure. Well, we have to know where those other consciousness comes from. It comes from the one. So it's both separate and the same. It's a hypostatic union, right? So like our souls are tethered to the one by virtue of coming from it, but also separate in a way that we have our own consciousness for the one to appreciate as the other. It is both itself and something else, because it cannot be like there's not a two, there's only the one. Like there can't be any other one. It just is itself. So it has to, like, everything that it creates comes from it. It can't come from some other thing that it's interacting with it. Like, so like I said, it's all about the idea that it creates things or emanates things.
So the one creating us is like him looking himself in the mirror.
Yes, exactly. It's a very intimate experience, and I think that's sort of what Plotinus was trying to get at. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce you to. Have you read anything about David Hume, the Scottish philosopher?
I'm aware of his basic philosophy. I haven't read any of his actual works. No.
Okay, because idealism or the Platonist ideas have been debunked in philosophy for quite some time, and science as well, because the School of Athens, the very famous Sistine Chapel painting of I think Raphael, where Plato has got his index to the sky.
Aristotle.
Aristotle.
Diogenes is laying on the ground. Yeah, it's very famous.
Aristotle had his palm sort of grounded and say, no, knowledge is down here, and Plato say, no, it's out there. So it's the a priori, a posteriori knowledge.
Yes.
It's been claimed that math and the rules of logic, because they transcend our existence, they must have come from a place outside of ourselves, because we find ourselves having to engage reason to talk about reason, and therefore it sits outside of our realm as a evidence of knowledge outside of ourselves. Here, Plato and Aristotle in the middle. You can see.
Yeah. See that he's chilling on the ground. Okay.
Yeah. School of Athens. So the David Hume shows in the debunking of a priori knowledge that math is not discovered, it's created. It's a tool that we've created. So it does the 1 + 1, even though it's always going to equal 2, but the result 2 has the inbuilt premises of 1 + 1 in it, and therefore it's not an a priori knowledge. It's a tool that we've devised, and we can create to describe the world around us. It's not prescriptive; it's descriptive. So that we don't discover math; we've made it. Leibniz and Newton came up with calculus at the same time. And it's created, and it's a mathematical way of calculating numbers as they are changing and evolving over time, and the human mind can do that. So it's a tool where they have not discovered it; they've created it, they've made it. And so are the rules of logic. The law of non-contradiction is not transcendent; it's inbuilt and something called prescriptive reality. And David Hume explains there's no a priori knowledge at all. For example, the married bachelor example, that all bachelors are unmarried, and you cannot falsify that. It's completely, if you take the premises, the conclusion are always going to be true, and that sort of Aristotelian deduction. But that's not outside of the realm, because you can, for example, the word bachelor is only linked to humanity. If every single human in the world dies, the word bachelors are unmarried, or every bachelor is on an unmarried male, it can be completely, it makes no sense if humanity ceased to exist, because the word bachelor is only linked, and marriage, the marriage constitution, is only linked to humanity. That word would actually make no sense. So the a priori knowledge seems to be quite intuitive to us, but David Hume shows quite cleverly and quite succinctly that it is a human construct where we reverse engineer certain conclusions and make them sound as if they are cosmic laws. They are not cosmic laws. They are not to be found and not to be discovered, but we've created them to explain certain realities.
Yeah, I'm aware of the argument. I think a lot of sort of younger college students who are like sort of new to atheism also make the argument, sort of, how could we know anything outside of our heads or anything outside of social constructionism is true? I hear it a lot. I heard it earlier today, and I forgot how I debunked it. I think it was regard more to the artistic standpoint. But I think one of the problems here is that we're attacking the link, sort of the link between the person and external reality, and confusing that with a descriptive claim of external reality, as opposed to I'm not sure if a prescriptive claim would be the opposite of that per se. But even if it is descriptive, like, why are we describing anything at all? Well, because something external is interacting to us. Okay, why is that which is external interacting to us in a way that is universal? Why do we have to agree that the word theist means something, or that the word super chat's appreciated?
But sorry to interrupt, Latens, but I reject that. You don't need an external source for you to communicate or describe something. For example, Neil can tell me right now, I bought a new car. And I'm going to ask Neil, right? Oh, describe the car. He's going to say it's red. It's a Ford Mustang, and Neil does not need any external influence to communicate and describe something to me. It's a tool. It's a tool that we devise as humans because it makes us navigate life a lot easier.
Sure. Has he ever interacted with the form of car prior to his description?
Well, the car is not an a priori concept. The concept of a car has been created, and it's created to become a vehicle for us to transport goods and ourselves in an easier way. So there wasn't a car that pre-existed the human conception.
Right. I agree that humans created cars, but whenever we're talking about describing cars, like, unless you had an experience with a vehicle prior, you wouldn't know what you were talking about. Like, so it's the experience that comes first, and then the descriptive claim that comes after.
No, it's the need that gave rise to creating a vehicle. So humanity have over time, and remember, the car has evolved.
So should we use something natural instead, so that it's not something that humankind created? Like,
well, this is going to be the genetic fallacy. We're going to the blind watchmaker and the watchmaker, the William Paley. This is equating something that is manufactured to something natural is going to lead to problems. But let's say it in the right.
I'm not a fan of the blind watchmaker theory. I think it's a very a new age sort of apologetics viewpoint. I don't think. I think a much more elegant version of intelligent design theory comes from Kurt Gödel, however you say his name. But that's for a different story, because that's not what led me to believe in theism. The forms led me to believe in theism. But I like, the reason why I'm saying we should look at something natural is so that you can't say, oh, humankind needed this, so they created it. Like trees, like, okay, we didn't create trees, so like we can't use that as the same example as we would vehicles, right?
What about forms is what you said forms led you to believe in theism. What about forms that got you to believe that?
Sure. So I'm not sure where to start here. We could talk about what a form is, or we could just talk about the general theory that led me to theism. So I was raised Catholic, so the sort of Augustinian approach to theism sort of led me there, where he took Plato's idea of forms, and then he said that there must be a form of forms from which all forms come from, because every smaller form like interacts with a greater form, right, or a less complex form, right, and these forms come from the world of ideas and the noetic mind of God, and there must be a oneness from which this noetic mind comes from. And so that's the like form of forms, which is God, which is divine simplicity. So yeah. And that's sort of what led me there. Yeah.
So how do you deal with the concept of suffering and evil without having like an Adam and Eve type of event?
Yeah, right. Forgive me if I'm missummarizing Leibniz, the Leibniz argument, but I think we live in the best possible of all worlds. And the reason why is because we have imperfect perspectives on our own suffering and the suffering of others. And we don't see the full tautology of suffering the way that the one does. So whenever the one views time, it views time in both an instant and in eternity, because doesn't interact with time, because the one cannot change, right? Because to be changing would be to be within becoming as opposed to being, if that makes any sense. There's a that's a little bit esoteric, but
so when an animal is born and gets eaten right away because there's a predator right down the like a little baby animal is born into this universe and is eaten within seconds. I mean, how do you explain that with the theory that there's a perfect being that's putting this all together? That's my
It's
question.
more like it's less of a perfect being putting a puzzle piece together, and more like from the beginning of time to the end of time, if we view it as one, the good and the bad will always equalize each other out. It's sort of like a law of it's like if you drop something in water, it will always come up to the surface if it has like enough buoyancy. And so there's always just enough good and evil in the world to balance each other out. It's like a law. Like and it's not like God is just up there sort of trying to put the puzzle pieces together. Like it's like something bad happens, so I have to make something good happen, or else like no, it's like goodness emanates exists from being itself. So any amount of bad will always lead to good. It's like an equilibrium.
Okay, and then you mentioned before that you don't think that deism is true because you don't think there's a laissez-faire, hands-off creation event. You don't think that there's a God that just sparked things in motion and then let go. You think that there's a God actually intervening. My question is, where do you see that?
Right. I don't believe in the Hebrew God anymore. I think Christians have a bigger burden. People who practice Islam and Judaism have a bigger burden of proof because they believe in things like miracles and interventionism and like God coming down to the garden and like saying, Adam, where are you? Like those are big burdens of proof, and God has to change his nature in order to like meet those burdens. And I just don't think it makes sense. I think that the alternative is not deism. It would be this sort of Plotinian monotheism where God transcends time, and therefore, so what I'm saying is if there are miracles or interactions, since God sees all of time as one, they've been answered from the start of time, right? And to us, it would appear no different than like his divine providence working in the second that it happens, but he's always planned it out because he sees all of time as one, right? So like if we have a proper understanding of God as this thing which exists outside time and sees all of time as one and is eternal goodness, then oh wait, these problems are like solved pretty easily. But if we view God as this very personal thing who just like comes down from heavens and commands and has commandments and has a chosen people, whether it's Israel or Iran, like it makes no sense. I'm totally on board, and that's why I had to drop the sort of Abrahamic idea of God. Yeah.
And do you have an answer to what's the point of all this? If what's the point then? If we're all just sort of at God's sandbox, what is it? What is the?
Oh, it's so cool. So Plotinus says that the goal is to go back to God, right? So God creates us, well, not create, but like emanates us through sheer love and being, and then we have to discover that through through mystical union, right? And so that's why we should spend our lives like praying and like focusing on like truth and virtue, right? And then with that level of like mystic union with God, we return back to him. It's like a great coming home, right? That's what he said. There's a video I can send you a link to, but it's like a short inspirational video by an author who's an expert on Plotinus, where he talks about the goal of life according to Plotinus. It's quite touching, and I think it makes total sense.
Yeah, no, I've read Plotinus a little bit. He's an interesting character, definitely. And but the question is, if that's what God wants, what don't you have to say he's sort of failing at getting people to see this sort of goal?
Oof, good question. I'm not sure how to respond in the moment. I would say that like a lot of half truths have intervened, and like they do what half truths do, which is like lead us on the right track, but like not right enough. And so like you have like Abrahamism, which is like a half truth. It's like, okay, there's one God, he's divine simplicity. Great. Oh, except he does all these miracles, and like you have Jesus, and then you have like Abraham. It's like, whoa, hold on. And it's like we were on the right track. I mean, there are some philosophies and cultures where they got it right the first time, and then something happened. Like the idea in ancient Chinese culture of Shangji, right, which is just the one in China, right? It's like, oh, they kind of got it right the first time, but then of course there were other imperial powers that intervened with that idea. So it's a difficult question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm not sure if the way we would answer that is looking through every single culture and saying, oh, here's how this culture intervened with that culture to get in the way of God's plan. And like even the word God's plan, does God's plan have a sort of Abrahamic undertone to it that is having us miss the big picture? Like we have to rework everything now if we drop the Abrahamic idea of like one God, right?
Sorry, Platonist, to intervene here. So how do you determine what the one wants from you? What is that you need to do to be one with that one?
I still need to read that chapter in Plotinus. He has a chapter in his 6 Aeneids, which talks about whether or not the one has a will. If it transcends will, does it have will? And if it does not have will, is that a mandate for deism? I don't think it is, because you couldn't have mysticism if there was deism, right? And Plotinus is a mystic, right? So I'm still learning myself how to achieve this mystical state and union with oneness. So I'm not going to try and answer questions that I don't know the answer to.
I respect that answer. I can't stand when people try to just pull something off the ceiling and say this. I respect that answer. Like
I respect it, but I have a problem with it at the same time, because
Sure.
If I haven't finished the book, or I haven't finished the full idea, I will not take it to be my own until I'm done with it. You know, how can you be convinced of an idea before you finish knowing everything about it? Because it might be, what if the Platonists of the last couple of chapters you're going to read, and goes, bloody hell, that's not exactly what I expected. I'm going to throw this whole thing.
Hey, that's a great point. Well, I seriously doubt that Plotinus is going to do a 180 and change his entire summary. He's already provided the basic thesis for me, so I get what the fundamental. It's just certain individual nitpicky questions like, oh wait, does the one have a will? And if he does, like, what is that? And can we call it a will? It's like, but I've still been educated by smarter Platonists than I about things like divine providence, for example. Which is a lot different in the Platonic notion than it is in the Abrahamist notion, right? And it's, in my opinion, it makes so much more sense. Or the way God interacts through time as like it being this viewing of time at like all at once. I think it's so much more coherent. And there's a reason why even medieval Christians and Islamic scholars tried to adopt this sort of thinking. It's because it made sense. It cleared everything up and made it make like a lot more sense. So, but I don't have all the answers. And I think that's a very specific question to where I don't have to sort of sacrifice everything I've learned in order to answer it. Right. So, yeah.
And I'm just wondering, where are, when I watch these call-in theist shows, where's all the Platonists at? Like, I would probably give credit where credit's due, whereas at least you guys have some sort of like basis on what, like, you have a system that has answers to certain things, whereas theism is just like, well, the Bible said so. So like I don't know. Like, I wish there was more people like you who would have a more coherent idea of what they think of a creator is.
I super appreciate that. Yeah. And I think it starts with the question of like, what is a creator? I mean, that's a complicated question. Is a creator one who emanates his own being into creation, or is a creator one who crafts things like in Genesis? Like, I don't know, but I think it depends on the denomination of theist. I mean, the 98% of theists in the world are like Abrahamic monotheists, and some of them are fundamentalists, but I would argue that even the most intelligent ones, like, you know, Catholic and Orthodox, they're the most intelligent theists, right? They have some fundamentalist stuff that are infallible that they cannot disagree with, like the idea that we come from two primordial human beings, specifically, which is just not true. That's not the current consensus on how like science works. Like, that doesn't make it, but they need to make it work. Why? Because of scripture, right? Yeah. And so it's like we're less trying to justify some ancient book, and we're more into metaphysics, pure metaphysics. Like, what happened to this pure art that is like ancient that we've let go of in the name of like David Hume and scientism? It's sad. But I would say that there are people who are trying to revive it. Look up Pierre Grimes. I wouldn't say he's a monotheist, but he's definitely a monist, which again to me is indistinguishable. Where he talks about the soul and God and the one, and he's a genius at this stuff. Check out Pierre Grimes.
Sure, I definitely will.
Yeah, my problem with all of this is one thing and one thing only.
Sure.
Back in the day, we lived a humble life, and it was very difficult for us to verify claims. So by pointing to the sky and say this is where God lives, it made it impossible and unfalsifiable to prove the opposite. Now we've evolved, and we can launch rockets, and we fly planes, and we can look into the skies and go into space, and we couldn't find God where he's supposed to have been. But now he's hiding behind another unfalsifiability. He is before time. By the way, time only started when space-time is created at the Big Bang.
Yes.
We don't know what happened before that. The word before even maybe does not make any sense, because the word before suggests that there is time, and there wasn't time for before to occur. So there are a couple of issues here. But it seems that God is evolving. Every time that the gaps closes down and we can pinpoint the areas where he said, this is where I dwell, we go, we looked and you weren't there. And he takes another step back and goes into another area where you cannot verify or falsify. Where does it stop? And why is that God is always hiding in an area where we cannot verify his existence? Is it a game of hide and seek?
This is such a great argument against miracles and like the divinity of Jesus and the Gospels. And it's such a terrible argument against God, because the idea of God that I'm talking about, this sort of oneness, this divine simplicity that Plotinus defends, and not just Plotinus, but other people in that time, it's existed for 1,800 years at least, right? It's not a shifting of the goalpost. We're not shifting a goalpost. I think scientists are upset at fundamentalists who are shifting the goalposts, or specific church leaders who are doing so in order to have some sort of congruency with the Gospels or to defend the Gospels. Again, this all comes down to, can you tie divine simplicity to ancient texts? And if you're trying to do that, you're going to have a tough time, because then the simplicity goes away and it's a lot more difficult. You get a lot more ties in with science and all that. And like, I have a question. Like, one of the things that sort of led me away from my previous faith was infallibility with regard to the Pope, for example, only applies to faith and morals, but not science. Okay, that's fair, but what happens whenever science intersects with morals, right? For example, Adam and Eve, right? Oops, now we have a problem, right? Now we have a problem, right? So I agree with you on half of this, on certain falsifiable claims that they shift the goalpost for. But like, whenever we talk about like, was there something before time? It's like, if Plato was right about this, then like, we're not trying to answer a scientific question. This is not a science. Are we allowed to answer non-scientific questions non-scientifically? That's my question for you.
So Platonism, I guess that, because I read the books, by the way, and I'm very well versed in Platonism. When you finish the 2 chapters that you haven't read yet, and for you to understand whether that one has a will of its own or not, and you're going to figure out that he's got a will.
Yeah.
If he's got a will and he's got intentions, he must be communicating them. And if he's communicating them, then there are certain requirements for you to achieve that sort of oneness with the one, and why cannot be achieved. Then the area of falsifiability is completely activated, because there's a claim and there's a counterclaim. The only way that this will stand is that particular entity is an unconscious and non-personal entity, is an agency that is not aware of itself, like the God of Spinoza, which is basically it's the physics that is not aware of itself.
Sure, I'm not sure if Spinoza was a deist or some sort of really basic philosophical theist. I haven't read enough. Like, he might be a pantheist. I don't know. Like,
he was definitely a deist. He was definitely he was definitely a hands-off God that sparked things in motion and literally went away. That's what he says.
The movement for deism started with a misreading of a lot of like the middle-aged Platonic thought regarding the will of God. Again, I totally subscribe to the idea of a will pre-existing time and thus intervening in it properly. As in, like, if you see like we're not thinking about every microsecond that passes by, because to us that's no different than an instant, or to like as infinitesimally small, right? So like, what if the time of the universe is no different to God, because he would just be that great? And so any will would not really be a will in which he's interacting with time. It would be no different than if it all happened instantaneously. But again, this brings questions to, like, what is heaven? Well, according to Plato, heaven is a place where motion does not exist, because motion is that which is becoming, and heaven is a place full of being. You're not becoming, you're being. That's where the forms are. So there is no motion except for the form of motion, which is constantly in motion, right? And it doesn't change, right? So the forms are unchanging. Their imperfect counterparts here are changing, right? So it brings in a lot of good questions, but I don't think, like, it makes things automatically unfalsifiable. And I don't think it challenges the idea of a personal God if our idea of a personal God is one who, like, our essence is his, and it's a shared essence of being, right? A true empathy in which he sees and hears this same things that you do, because he's part of his creation, and his creation emanates from him, right? This sort of hyper intimate experience, right? I'm totally in favor of that type of personalism.
So I'll have to invoke the problem of evil, even though it's repeated, because your God, who is pure essence, is goodness, and
Sure.
and Neil has posed a question about an infant animal who's just born just to be devoured alive within seconds.
Yeah.
Was this the only way God could have created the balance to introduce evil? Because we're not talking about suffering, we're talking about gratuitous suffering and unnecessary suffering. Because I can conceive of a life where life can flourish, like the life of plants, and without devouring the flesh of a living thing, like what happens to the wildebeest and hyenas in the savannas of Africa.
Right.
I don't need. God does not need that. So, that's nothing to do with human intervention here. The great, what's his name? The guy from the pianist.
Wolfgang?
We haven't started. We haven't started. The fire was always burning.
Oh yeah,
Billy Joel.
Billy
Joel. Yeah. So this sort of thing used to happen way before we came to Earth. The evil, gratuitous suffering of beings. Why would that smart, wise, benevolent entity create certain things, unless this is the only way you could strike a balance? And then you'll ask the question, then looks like that one is restricted by certain rules, like the rules of logic, like you can't carry
Absolutely. Hold on. It's very important that paradoxes don't falsify God, because God would need something to bound to. There's a great lecture by Pierre Grimes. It's not on this exact subject, but it's about how is the one bounded, right? And the one has to be bounded in some sort of way. Otherwise, you get paradoxes and you get things that make no sense. Can the one overstep its boundaries of being? All this stuff. That's a great lecture. But you're asking about. I would put it this way. Let's say you're a parent and you take away a child's crayons, right? And they don't know why. And you're doing it because, you have to leave the house soon, right? So it's time to stop playing. So you take their crayons. To them, their world is shattered. They have no idea why you're doing this to them. It's like, it makes no sense. It's unfair. It's unjust, because they can't see the big picture. But you're the parent. You see the big picture. You know what's going to happen in 5 minutes whenever you have to leave the house. Someone who sees the big picture would know just the amount of correct and true suffering that has to occur.
That's still not a justification to the person who's suffering. Christopher Hitchens talked about Frau Fritzl, the lady who was kept captive by her own father for 25 years and being raped and sodomized in a cellar in a house. He had children from her who he also raped, and 2 of them died in the process. And she was suffering, crying, praying for 25 years for anything to happen. But God says, no, hold on a second here. You don't see the big picture. I've got a plan. All tears are going to be wiped later on. The suffering of this lady will be justified because she is going to be living in eternal bliss thereafter. Don't tell me that the suffering imposed on a sentient being is well justified by how they're going to be treated after the suffering has subsided.
Right. I think this argument only works if the sentient being created the suffering so that they could say, look, I just made the suffering happen so that I could give them eternal life. It's like, whoa, that's not how that works. There's only one example I can think of where that actually works. And it's in the Old Testament in the book of Job, where God teams up with Satan to torture Job and then says, hey, look, it's all okay because their family's in heaven. It's like, what? No, that's terrible.
No,
So
but
that's a much better example of what I'm talking about.
natural disasters has nothing to do with humans. We just recently had mudslides that killed hundreds of thousands of people, and or who's in control here? Like
Right.
Martyrdom would say.
So the fact that beauty is capable of coming from tragedy means that there must be a God making that beauty happen. That's like eternally good, right? So like if for for example, if I lose a limb in combat, but I use my inability to walk to talk about the gift of like what it means to be able to walk and how grateful you should be for everything, and I become a motivational speaker, I've created beauty from tragedy. Therefore, like a greater good has come from my suffering. It seemed unnecessary in the moment, but it always led to a greater good. And this is eternally true. This is like a universal.
But it's like it's exactly the same argument as doctors are brilliant. God created illnesses so we can have doctors, because doctors transcend that and help us. But we bloody don't need doctors. If there were no suffering and no diseases, I could easily do away with doctors and I wouldn't miss a thing.
Right,
So
but if you're only defining suffering as that which occurs despite the fact that we're trying our best to maximize good, then like I don't see what the issue is. Doctors are trying to maximize their good. Like that's totally okay. Like if you maximize your good and suffering still happens and then goodness comes from that suffering, I don't see what the issue is.
Because they're dealing with the status quo. They're not the designers of the initial conditions. The designer of the initial conditions is responsible, not the person who's actually dealing with the.
So this is a criticism of the way that the universe was designed so that suffering could take place.
Absolutely, it's a flawed design. No, not just suffering. We're talking about gratuitous, free suffering. That deer that gets caught in between two rocks in an area where there is no conscious being is there to recognize or understand or witness its 6 days suffering before it dies out of thirst and hunger.
So I don't like the animals about.
What wisdom is that?
I don't like the arguments about animals because I feel like we project our conscience and soul-based experience onto their experience, even though it's not going to be the same one. Animals don't think about heaven or hell. Animals don't think about paradise or happiness. Like they just do things according to natural law. So it's not a good example to bring up animals.
But it does. But Platonists, what about?
Because I see a lot of animals. You see a lot of love. You see a lot of emotions coming from them. They get sad when their family members get lost in the woods.
Oh, sure. And now,
there seems to be a lot of the same traits that we carry in our emotions.
Right. So Plotinus talks about the soul of knowing and the soul of knower. And this is a complicated subject, but about whether or not there's certain forms of matter which encompass souls which are meant to observe reality, or whether or not they're meant to be that which is observed in reality. So we have to ask, is this animal containing a soul which is to be observed by the soul? And that's a complicated question. So I don't.
The soul is superfluous here. We're talking about suffering.
Wait, you cannot talk about suffering.
But I'll just finish one sentence here. A person with a mental handicap who is not capable to understand complex ideas like God or even existence, not aware, but still suffers. Are you saying that this person, because of his lack of ability to understand certain things, it's okay to torture them, or it's okay to?
Oh no! But this is bizarre because humans should maximize their ability to do good. We're talking about suffering that has no intention at all, right? You can't torture someone just because, there's no reason to torture someone actually, but
So, but I'm not talking about another human doing the torturing here. I'm talking about the initial conditions, the torture. So that deer that gets caught and there is absolutely no lessons learned or drawn from its suffering. Why does it happen?
But this is bizarre because torture implies intent. Who is the one torturing?
Well, the designer of the initial conditions. If you design life to be predicated on create animals who can eat other animals, they cannot even mix. They cannot eat. They're not omnivorous. They're carnivorous. They can only eat the flesh of other animals, and they're not scavengers. They hunt and they sink their teeth in them while they're alive, inflicting pain and suffering. Why would you design life like that because we're talking about energy. Food is extracting energy. I conceive of a life that is designed where you can get the necessary energy for you to function without inflicting suffering on other sentient beings, or at least make these beings who are going to be fed on have no central nervous system so they don't suffer.
Right. So wouldn't you expect a world of being and changing to have some degree of imperfection? Like, I'm curious, like, if the only world capable of being truly perfect, as in without any amount of suffering whatsoever, was the world of like unchangingness, aka the like world of forms, wouldn't you expect the world of changingness to have some degree of suffering?
But why even have the world of changingness? Why not just have it all in heaven?
Oh, Plotinus said that the world of matter was the lowest form of the good because it was the only form of the good capable of creating suffering or having suffering. And so, like, having a change in being, or aka becoming, means that matter is able to be evil. None of the other planes of existence, right? The world of becoming, or sorry, the world of being, aka like the world of what's he called it? Divine intellect? I'm not sure. And if there are any Plotinians or Platonists watching this cringing, please correct me. I don't want to be ignorant. I don't want to walk in my own ignorance. Please, God. But the other, there's a hypostasis that Plotinus talks about. He's one of the older authors of a sort of Platonic Trinity. And in all three forms of the Trinity, right, which is the one, the divine intellect, and the world soul, these are unchanging worlds. So anything unchanging is incapable of creating any amount of suffering or imperfection. But then there's the world of matter. Now, matter's still good because it comes from the one. Anything that comes from the one is good, but it's capable of evil as well and imperfection, right? And so now we have to ask the source, where does chaos and imperfection come from? I think the issue here is that Plotinus and other thinkers like this have probably answered every single one of these questions. He meditated about this for multiple decades. Like, I'm sure he lived in one of the most tumultuous, violent times in world history, right? So he's definitely like addressed all this. I just need to read it, and I don't want to.
But you see, Platonists, yeah, the problem of evil has evolved. It used to be the Epicurean old problem of evil, which is Thomas Aquinas and I think St. Augustine of Hippo sort of addressed at the time. But we're talking about something called the evidential problem of evil. That's the newest version of it, which talks about gratuitous suffering. Yes, I can conceive of a life that has challenges, paper cuts, having to work 2 shifts to make do, to struggle in life a bit, lose your father in a young age, and because of heart attack, and you having to learn hard lessons. Character building challenges are there. That's all right. I'm accepting that. What is not accepted is flaws in the design itself. Gratuitous suffering where no lessons. 2-year-old kid that sort of lives for 2 days just to die out of agony of cancer, of bone marrow cancer. The suffering that does not have an explanation. It doesn't make any sense. It's not needed to build any characters. You can build characters, but with smaller challenges, and definitely the natural disasters that keep happening around us that harvest most of the world's population before they even try anything. That makes no sense.
So did the child have enough time or use their time to reach a mystical union with God? In your scenario, I'm curious.
No. My scenario is why to have this scenario in the first place?
Because we're dealing with a reincarnation model for Platonists, right? So wouldn't you just get like a second chance, and like maybe the second life is better, unless he reached mystical union, in which case.
But how would a 2 years old? This 2 years old is not even aware. So that 2 years old is going to go to a realm where he's a 35 years old man. Have never lived. This baby's never lived.
I don't know of anybody who gets reincarnated at 35 years old.
So what would the reincarnation of a 2 years old that is not aware, that needs diapers to be changed? What's the use of having that being reincarnated to be dependent on someone else changing diapers. I mean, it makes no sense.
I don't know what you mean. The baby would just be reincarnated into a new baby. If it was a baby who died a tragic death, it would just be like starting life all over again. I mean, this is a reincarnation model, right?
So that baby will be born, but this time it's not going to reborn. But this time it's not going to die.
I mean, sure, yeah, or it could be reborn as many times as possible. Who knows? I think the issue here is we're not dealing with the heaven, hell, purgatory model anymore. We're dealing with a reincarnation and mystical union model, right? So the goal, right, is to, over many lives, or if possible, a single life, develop a mystical union with the one so that we can go back to God. And if we can't do that, we just try again. And the cool thing about this is that it solves the hell problem, right? Because if an all-powerful, loving God exists, why is there hell? Well, hell is the mistakes that we create. And so if we're a toxic human being, imagine being reincarnated and making the same errors over and over again. That would kind of be like hell, right?
But it helps to retain some memory, because you're void of any memory of your previous experiences. How the hell do you learn? I mean, one of the things about learning mistakes is you retain the memory of you making the mistake so you can improve next time. But if your memory is erased every single time, you come back and you're asked to reinvent the wheel, unless you're talking about the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind by Jim Carrey, where they still keep falling in love even though memories were erased. I mean,
yeah. Two things on this. One that I'm sure of, and one that I'm not sure of, and I don't want to speak in ignorance ever. The one that I'm not so sure about is Plato does have the myth of air, and I'm not sure how mythological he thinks this myth is, but it's a version of heaven and hell where neither state is eternal, and the soul, depending on how they choose their attributes and based off of their previous lives, will be reincarnated accordingly, if I'm remembering correctly. But again, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if I believe in it. It seems a little bit too convenient. Again, I'm big on falsify. Like I don't want to get a get out of jail free pass. So that seems kind of like a get out of jail free pass, but it might also be true. So I'll discern it more. But the other thing is, every life is an opportunity to pursue virtue, right? And so I don't see what the issue is if you're just reincarnated over and over again. Even if you don't remember your past life, eventually you're going to get opportunities to pursue virtue and to become mystical and to just be one with reality as a gift. Like
but you see, by not retaining the memory, it makes it a game of luck, and it makes it, because if you have infinite time to try, mathematically there will be the one time when you get it right, just by the virtue of randomness and numbers. But that does make the whole thing about experience and learning from experience is that accumulative knowledge that you gain over time, so you can better yourself. It makes the whole reincarnation exercise invalid and completely superfluous and not needed if the whole thing is based on infinite numbers of trials, and therefore you will get it right eventually, because what happens if you have that infinite number,
sure,
and because of the rules of randomness you get it right the first time?
Okay, well, sure. Well, some people do. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and so can I ask you this? Has your life had a certain amount of suffering that you would say maybe led to something good or was necessary?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of good things have come from suffering for me and for everyone.
Sure.
And I don't dispute that. It does.
Okay, but would you trade that for a life where you could just cut to the chase and avoid this suffering and get right to becoming a better, would you just be born a perfect person? Would you rather
if heaven exists, the narrative, the Islamic or the Christian heaven, probably would be the most boring place I can ever imagine. I love a bit of a challenge, but I don't need any supernatural entities. I know the life we live in. I understand why animals have to devour other animals in order to survive. I understand that we have challenges, and it's imperfect world because we evolved imperfectly. I can completely understand and explain and appreciate the life we live in, void from a supernatural creator. I completely understand it. I don't need somebody to design this for me to make sense of my suffering and to learn from it.
So that doesn't really answer my question. I'm not talking about skipping straight to heaven. I'm talking about having a perfect life, like a perfect finite life here on Earth, like one without any suffering, would you rather have that one or the one with the appropriate amount of suffering that leads to character development and becoming a better person and all that?
The appropriate amount.
Okay, yeah. I imagine that would be most people. So what if that's the default? Now I'm just speculating. This is not from Plato, it's me. What if that's the default, and then like evil from individual people, souls, that's the non-default, right? So they make it worse, but there's a certain amount of like natural suffering that makes the soul better, or like makes our lives better. Like would that be something that you're like, in a world where things change, wouldn't you expect some natural and appropriate suffering?
But that's the problem.
The possible way.
Yeah, the natural suffering exceeds the harms caused by humans and other agencies. So the natural suffering throughout the ages, if you calculate the numbers of suffering that happens to beings through through design, is way more than the random killing in a New York mugging.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the best point. I don't have a response to it. I mean, but I also don't believe that there's such thing as a mathematical study where you can conjure up every single human being that's ever lived and say definitively that, because our idea of what good is may not be actually good. So like our idea of good may just be like having lots of phones and technology and stuff like that, but it may like not be living the good life like the ancient Greeks talked about, where we're talking with each other and trying to like work with nature to appreciate like the value of life. And I'm interested because atheists say that I'm not sure if you're an atheist or an agnostic. I would hate to assume before.
I'm an atheist.
Oh, okay. Atheists often say that life is valuable because it's scarce and because it's finite, right? So in that case, are their lives of greater value because they were shorter back then?
No. So it's nothing to do with the measurement of one's life in particular, but as life as a whole, because it's finite. Life as a whole is finite. By the way, time doesn't exist in physics. There's no such thing as time. Time is just the arrow of time. It's just how we measure and how we conceive of things. But
that's
time
a great argument for divine simplicity. Yeah.
Look, the kind of God that you're talking about follows some rules of quantum mechanics and science. Time doesn't exist. The future, the past, and the present to the universe is one and the same. There is no such thing. But the problem is, how do I know that this claim that you're making is true? It's reasonable. I can conceive of it. I'm not saying it's absolutely wacky. The problem has always been the case. There's absolutely zero evidence for it. How do we know the Platonist claim?
How do I know? What is the Platonist claim?
that there is a priori knowledge. There's knowledge that precedes.
Sure. Well, two things to this. One, it's funny. I was called a scientismist the other day by a Catholic who said I was too critical of church history and the Bible and stuff. So it's funny to know that an actual scientismist is saying that I require too much faith. This is awesome. Thank you so much. Secondly, I would say that a priori values help us create better societies that are healthier for our being. So we have to put a certain amount of faith in that which is like maybe not just more reasonable or debatably reasonable, but unfalsifiable, but also that which is just better for us. Like it's not psychologically or spiritually good to believe that your mind creates reality or that society just constructs things. Like we have to appreciate things as the external gift of reality. It might just be that like if I was an atheist, I would still try to believe in God because, well, maybe it's just psychologically, collectively good for us to. And then we can work with whatever kind of God that we come up with. So, but even so, a prioriism is helpful. We create societies based off of a priori truths. We like debate things based off of, it's just much more efficient philosophically and ethically to make that assumption and to make that leap of faith. So I'm willing to make that leap. And then everything else past that is debatable. Then like the atheist is like, oh, wait, we're like assuming things now. Oh, shucks. Now we have to debate metaphysics and, right. So yeah, that's my take.
I'm fine with that. And we can go back and forth all day on suffering and the evidence and how do you know this, that, and the third. You could go back on us and say, what do you know what happened before the Big Bang? We can go back and forth all day on that. But I want to say this. I would love to see you challenge more traditional theists. For example, like the Catholics who hide behind your Platonist philosophies and use that and apply it to the Bible. Whereas Plato's actually talking about, I pulled up the tomatoes just to look it up. Plato says that the creator can only be one. There can't be a second one. There can't be a 3 or 2. It only has to be one. And
Yeah.
then he talks about the God. If God is perfect, he can't be jealous. Where in the Bible he says, "I'm a jealous God."
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was one of the verses that started to make me turn, because I read that, and then I read the Timaeus, which is a way better creation story. And I was like, wait, it says here that God is not jealous, right? But it says in the Bible, yeah. And I was like, oh shucks, right? So and then there's of course the pseudo fringe theory that you had Russell Merkin on, who talked about. I'm not sure if his theory is true. I think it could be true. But it might be that the Timaeus inspired the priestly version of Genesis, which is super interesting. So to me, it's like, I want to get to the metaphysics. Like, that's what I believe, and that's what keeps me going. So let's talk about that, and let's not waste our time with trying to focus on the book of Job and whether or not it was a good idea for Satan and God to team up to torture a guy, which probably didn't actually exist. Like that's so I will be doing it. I am going to be starting a YouTube channel soon.
Awesome.
I'm not sure if I'll be going incognito or revealing myself. It's still up for debate, but I will be starting a YouTube channel soon, and I want to educate myself more so I don't talk out of my butt. So I need to read more Plato and more Aristotle and more Plotinus to really know the stuff and know everything, right? So that I can,
But at the end of the day, my conversation with Platonists will be epistemological. So we're going to disagree on certain things, but we can go to a pub and have a beer, and watch our favorite sport and have a laugh and have a chat. The problem is, and I don't have a problem with that kind of God that Platonist is advocating, because there is such thing, you can take it or leave it. But it's those who want to kill you and want to divorce you and want to challenge you and take you out from a certain community, and you can't give blood donation because the blood transfusion is forbidden, and all these people who intervene in your little intricate life and tell you how to live life. These are the problem, existential problem with. My problem with Platonists would be knowledge-based. It's a conversation, but we can continue living side by side, no problems whatsoever.
Indeed. And I think, again, you have to remember, I came from a Catholic background, so the vast majority of my criticism was targeted toward the best of the best Catholic theology and apologetics. I did not go on some random shady site. No, I went on CatholicAnswers.com, and I went through the stuff that did not convince me, and then I researched about the things that did not convince me from the world's top apologists. Like, I really wanted to stay Catholic. You have no idea. And so that's sort of what made me turn, is that, like, if these top apologists from like the leading institution of Christianity cannot answer my questions, then oops. But at the same time, I think we should be hesitant to lump all Christians together, because, like, again, the Orthodox and Catholic tradition, they have a tradition, and there's a lot of them, and they're smart, and so I wouldn't necessarily put them in the same category as some more fundamentalist and creationist types like Kent Hovind. Like, every Christian is different, and some even here's what got me. Some don't realize that they don't agree with the Nicene Creed or the fundamental views of the church. If you really told people the current consensus on evolutionary theory and then told them about the church's stance on Adam and Eve, they would be heretics. They really would. So I feel like if more people knew about their own heresies, then like, that would be an interesting sort of thing. Good
point. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to, if you start a channel, keep in touch, and we'll have more of these dialogues going forward.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It made it fun.
Enjoyed the conversation for sure.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
So I got a super chat from City. By the way, that was interesting. But I just want to get to this really quick because it's been up for so long, and we can talk about that in a second. What did Nietzsche say about Christianity? Sorry for the wait, and I appreciate the super chat. Nietzsche, what did he say? He said a lot.
Slave morality. So Nietzsche was, even though his dad was Lutheran, he actually didn't like Christianity at all, and he went out of his way to criticize it. And he, in his ethics and morality, he called Christians to have the slave morality. And he contrasted with something called master morality. And the master and the slave here is not, they are figure of speech. They're not really masters and slaves, because one of Nietzsche's philosophies called, in German, I'm going to say it in German, I'm going to translate it into English, Selbstüberwindung, or self-overcoming. And to overcome yourself means to be master of your own self, is to be able to guide yourself and control yourself. He called Christianity to be a slave morality is because it's all day virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It's like you're so freaking weak to start with, and you get hit on.
I got the best quote from the Antichrist. That's it has to do with what you're saying. I'm just going to read it. It's a quick little paragraph. It's so good. He says, "I have been understood at the opening of the Bible. There is the whole psychology of the priest. The priest knows of only one great danger, that is science, the sound comprehension of cause and effect. But science flourishes on the whole only under favorable conditions. A man must have time. He must have an overflowing intellect in order to know. Therefore, man must be made unhappy. This has been in all ages the logic of the priest. It is easy to see just what, by this logic, was the first thing to come into the world: sin. The concept of guilt and punishment, the whole moral order of the world, was set up against science, against the deliverance of man from priest." Woo!
It's spot on. I mean, Nietzsche is my favorite philosopher because he was so dark. So he was referring to Christian morality as the one that suppresses human self-esteem. You're weak to start with, and you get hit on the side of the head, and because I'm going to forgive you, it's like, what the hell are you forgiving? You've no power to forgive. You're weak to start with. The way to really properly forgive is you got to be strong enough to be able to inflict damage on the other person attacking you, but choose not to.
Yeah.
Not to be weak in the first place.
Yeah. No, it's right. And that's why he calls it slave morality, because it's it promotes the idea of self-inflictment and self-punishment rather than self rising and becoming what you literally should be, like, to be better, to enhance the world, to that's what he gets into. I just want to get that out the way because there was a super chat sit out there for like an hour. But that was a really interesting conversation. Before we close out, I just want to give our thoughts on this whole Platonist caller. It's interesting to see that people can have an idea of God and not sort of hold on to this sort of classical, biblical, and not have to pick a religion. Like Stephen Fry is a PhD. I think he's a scientist, right? I think is considered a scientist or whatever.
Are you talking about Stephen Fry, the English?
Stephen Fry. Oh no, I'm thinking of the guy who wrote the book about creationism recently. He was just on
because Stephen Fry is an English actor.
I'm thinking of someone else. I can't think of his last name right now. He was just on. I don't know. He was just on. Not Lawrence Cross. What the hell was he at? I can't remember his name. Anyways, there's this really smart, intelligent physicist. I think he is. I think he's either a physicist or something else. He's in the realm of science, but he's a creationist. And I thought, okay, let's hear what he has to say. And it turns out he's a Christian. I'm like, really? Like, really? Why do they always have to pick some sort of theology to go along with? But if you read his book, if you read what he's actually arguing, it's all...
Oh, Stephen Meyer? You're talking about Stephen Meyer?
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Stephen Meyer is the guy from the Discovery Institute. That's the ID.
Well, this guy argues, he uses Platonist arguments or deist arguments in some cases, and then just applies it to Christianity's true. That I don't understand. So when I hear people come on and have like a more coherent argument for God that's not based on any sort of text, it's more philosophical. I like that. I want to hear more of that. Not that I agree with it. I think there's a lot of holes in that, especially when it comes to suffering and what's the point of this, and can you show evidence of there being forms or metaphysical realms? Is God interfering? Where is it interfering? All that stuff. But at the same time, I wish there was more people that have that sort of line of thinking on God rather than the Bible said so.
Do you know why, Neil? Our morality has now surpassed the morality of God. But people still want to hang on to God. They want to say, no, that God couldn't have never meant it that way. He meant something else metaphorical. Or God is a metaphor. Or God is... So the evolution of God is getting... We're hitting into the spiritual realm now. where God is everything, is inside of you, is inside of me, and we're inside of God. We are God. God is us. And remember that song, "What if God was one of us?" It's a stranger one of us. We're heading into that direction, but the problem is there's no evidence for that. I'm open-minded. Give me some evidence, and I'll start believing. But until then, I'm just going to do the right thing by myself and by humanity. I'm going to continue to be a good person, treat people fairly. If there's a God at the end of all of this, then I wouldn't have a problem, unless he's an evil one. Then we're all in trouble. Nobody's safe.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good point. And by the way, before we close out, let everyone know where to find you. Anything you got going on that you want to plug on, go ahead.
No, look, I think we're going to be chatting to each other a lot in the future. So there's no point of, I think advertising ideas is just enough. People are going to find us. People, this is the time where people are consuming ideas more than ever. So nobody's going to sit around and watch TikTok of people flashing things and wasting their time. I think people are now tuning in to want to understand knowledge. They want to know where things are, what the hell they're doing here. Is there a God or not? What does science say about certain things? So we're entered a realm where people are just spending time trying to obtain gnosis. They, as you say, my dear friend. So seek and ye shall find.
All right, and like I always say, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over